Good evening. Welcome to today's session on the Accelerated Masters and Doctoral Program. My name is Professor Tennyson Moguchini. I am your facilitator this evening, and I also happen to be the project leader. The session that we have programmed for you is section on selecting research methods, and we're focusing on mixed methods. Before we begin the afternoon, before we begin the evening session, I will just run you through the plans and the way that the presentation is set up. For those of you who've attended these sessions, you will know that we have a facility for you to ask questions. So if you look at your screen somewhere above or somewhere on your gadget, you will notice an option that allows you to go on to the question and answer tab, and you can post your questions there. I will attend to them at that point. Secondly, in relation to the questions, once you've posed the questions, we will afford you the opportunity I will respond to the questions at the very end. If, of course, there are any other items that are more substantive than that, you all have access to our email address, and I trust you have all received invitations to submit your documents that are in progress, your proposals that you're working on, and other elements of your work. If, say, you are working on a chapter, all of that we have made a provision and invited you to submit them to our team so that we can have some of our critical readers look over the material and give you feedback. So that provision exists and it's available for your use. As far as this evening is concerned, I will once again be lecturing you on mixed methods. As per usual, I will be turning off the video feed in the next minute or so, after which you should have access to the actual presentation. This presentation will be availed to you if you are someone who is registered to come on to here. We will circulate the options that you have for accessing this. And of course, we have a video which will be accessible on any one of our platforms. We have traditionally availed only a YouTube option for people to access our presentations, but we're just finalizing plans to have the videos of all the sessions on a OneDrive option to allow those who have problems with accessing YouTube to get onto that. So this session that I'm doing will take approximately an hour and five or 10 minutes or so. There's quite a substantial number of slides, but I will work through some of them. I will work through some of the slides, and the ones that I jump are intended for you to address them or to utilize them in my absence, should you look at the presentation without me being present. So without further delay, I will now take us to the slide, and I hope that you're able to see the presentation that we have for you. And once again, today's session is mixed methods research. Now, before we can begin the session, it's important that I share with you some of the learning outcomes for the session. Firstly, we will very quickly remind you about the characteristics of quantitative and qualitative research designs. And then, of course, we will look at the use of mixed methods design research and how mixed methods research is utilized within different studies. And of course, after that, we will then look at the different types of mixed methods research And I will share with you some of the approaches to how the naming conventions for mixed methods designs work in relation to prioritization, in relation to the timing within which certain designs occur. Then, of course, we will very quickly walk through some of the weaknesses and strengths of mixed methods research. And I will provide some information about ethical issues and epistemological issues that can arise when one uses mixed methods research. As I say, a lot of the work that we do around methodologies really relates to getting you to understand some basic principles. So what I will start with is just to go through some definitional clarifications so you understand. And essentially, just before I get into this, the reason it's important that we look at quantitative approaches and qualitative approaches is that mixed methods is essentially about the presence of both these approaches in a single study, in one form or another. So if you have a study that is a substantive quantitative element and a substantive qualitative element, and both those are utilized in the pursuit of a single aim, then that is, of course, what comprises and makes a mixed method study. The way in which the different approaches are mixed determine the types of mixed method studies that we are talking about. But before we can get into the whole way that quantitative approaches and qualitative approaches are mixed, it's important that we just outline much more clearly what quantitative research is about, what qualitative research is about. This material should not be brand new to you. It should be us revisiting information that you already know. So here are some of the characteristics of quantitatively based research. It is based on objective conclusions, and in essence what we're saying is that objectivity in quantitative research is the approach that is central to quantitative research, whereas qualitative research is about subjectivity, where people's development of understanding is to do with the way in which they've personally constructed things. So we talk about quantitative approaches being objectivist and qualitative approaches being constructivist. One quantitative research is based on structured data, and qualitative data is based on unstructured data. And in that, you will notice that I have indicated some of the types of data collection approaches that you would find in quantitative research: the use of surveys, the use of experiments, versus the use of interviews, focus groups, observations. And then, of course, in terms of what each approach aspires to do, quantitative research is about studying subjects in a way that allows you to get some generalizability, so you are able to study patterns, relationships, and so forth. Some of you would have sat in on my quantitative research presentation that I did earlier on in the week, and you will remember how I was talking about quantitative research and qualitative research and drawing those comparisons. Of course, some of the designs that you would find in quantitative approaches involve experimental, quasi-experimental, and non-experimental approaches to research, whereas in qualitative research you will have different traditions such as phenomenology, grounded theory, ethnography, and case studies. And basically what this slide does is just remind us what the different components that are central to mixed methods research are. In essence, what we're saying is that mixed method research is the intentional combination of both quantitative approaches and qualitative approaches in a single study, focusing on the achievement of one specific aim. So, and ultimately, at the end of the day, when we talk about mixed methods, we're really talking about that intentional mixing of quantitative and qualitative research in a single study. But how they are mixed is what tells you the different types of mixed methods research that we are referring to. So firstly, mixed methods research, as I've said, it focuses on collecting, analyzing, and mixing both quantitative and qualitative data in a single study or a series of studies that are related to a particular study purpose or study aim. The central premise or the real focus of mixed methods is the use of both quantitative and qualitative approaches in combination, with the view that the argument is that you as the researcher believe that you will gain a better understanding of the research problem that you're looking at than you would be able to achieve if you utilized one of the approaches without the other. So when some people talk about mixed methods, they sometimes get it confused. They think mixed method research refers to the triangulation of data collection methods when all of them are from one space or one approach. So if you have a study that has 5 qualitative data collection methods, that is not a mixed method study because all the methods you're using are qualitative. What we call that a multi-approach or multi-method study, but not mixed method. And just be careful about that. And then, of course, if you have different studies that happen to have been written by you, and one is looking exclusively at qualitative data and another is looking exclusively at quantitative data, and you write about them at the same time, that is not mixed methods. Mixed methods refers to the intentional use of both qualitative and quantitative data in a single study that is responding to a specific research question, to one research question. So with that, that is the foundational clarification. And a lot of the times with mixed methods research, it's talking to people about what it is not rather than what it is. Many people think their studies are mixed methods research when in actual fact, if you analyze them using the rules of mixed methods research, you realize that it is not. And there are some myths and things that we have to deal with. People will think that doing mixed methods research is easier than doing qualitative research alone or quantitative research alone, because in their mind, they think if it's mixed methods research, you are afforded the ability to dilute the two different approaches. In actual fact, that is not correct. Mixed methods research is at least twice as difficult as each of the methods alone. And when I say at least twice, is because it carries every single requirement from qualitative research. It carries every single requirement from quantitative research, but then it also carries the requirement of understanding how to analyze and compare the findings from either one of the approaches in a single study. So being able to do the qualitative bit following all the qualitative rules, do the quantitative bit following all the quantitative rules, but then being able to take the research findings and interpret them in a way that utilizes both the quantity and qualitative in relation to each other. So that's the part that means very clearly that it's more than just qualitative and quantitative competencies that are needed. It is the additional competence of being able to look at things simultaneously and consider them in relation to each other. So, of course, people will say that I had said to you that quantitative research comes from a philosophical stance of objectivism. Objectivism being that philosophical stance where you think that everything can be counted objectively and that things have numeric values that are a matter of fact and not a matter of interpretation. Qualitative research, on the other hand, comes from interpretivism, constructivism, and all the different philosophical stances that are of the view that it is your social surroundings, it is your interpretations that shape how you see the world, and that one world looked at by different people can be seen differently. And that is what qualitative philosophical stances say. But mixed methods stances are basically based on pragmatism. And pragmatism really relates to being practical, being functional, being accepting that problems are understood and solved by holding multiple worldviews. So a problem is not just one that you see objectively or one that you see subjectively. You see it from the lens of both those worlds, and that research problems or the world we're living is ruled by changing worldviews, and that those worldviews involve counting numbers, quantitative measures, and that those worldviews involve interpretation, constructivism, and that they can be also qualitatively based. So when we talk about mixed methods and people ask what's the philosophical stance of mixed methods, the answer is simply pragmatism. Of course, I have mentioned very clearly that mixed methods research is about the utilization of both qualitative and quantitative data collection methods, having both qualitative and quantitative data analysis components, also interpretation methods that are both qualitative and quantitative, and then also having reporting that allows for both qualitative and quantitative debating points, all in a single study. That is what mixed methods is. Now, people ask, why would one use mixed methods? And basically, we're using mixed methods because the argument is that you as a researcher would have come to the conclusion that your study and the problem you're trying to look at is so complicated that you need to understand it using more than just one of the two approaches that we popularly have to choose from. You are in essence saying that, look, to study this topic that I'm looking at, I need both the qualitative and the quantitative philosophical stance to get it. And that you are in essence saying, look, I want to study this and be able to approach it with all the objectivism that is required, but also be able to approach it with all the subjectivism that is required. And how you determine whether it's mixed methods or not has everything to do with the question that is being answered. If the question that you're answering has a qualitative and a quantitative dimension, then it is a mixed method study. It is most likely that it will be a mixed method study. If the question only has an objective stroke quantitative dimension, then your study will be quantitative. So let's take, for example, if you were to ask a question, your research question was interested in the magnitude of a particular problem. So you are literally asking, how big is this thing? That is a quantitative problem, and the answer will therefore be quantitative. If you're interested in trying to understand why certain things are happening, and you're saying, why is this problem happening? That is likely to require narratives as responses, and those are qualitative questions. And if you had a question that says, what is the magnitude and reasons for the occurrence of this, then that question has got both a quantitative element and a qualitative element in a single research question, which then would point one to mixed methods research. So, of course, mixing methods is great, but it comes with some considerations. It is expensive. You are using 2 methodologies as opposed to 1. Then, of course, the fact that you are looking at a question using 2 very different worlds means you have to carefully handle the elements of your question using the right types of tools, the right type of constructs. You can't take a mixed method study and take the qualitative element of that study and apply quantitative things to it. It doesn't work. You have to apply qualitative principles to the qualitative element, quantitative principles to the quantitative element. So if you had a mixed method question that you are referring to, we would expect that when it comes to developing your data, your sampling strategy, maybe your sampling strategy for the quantitative bit will use quantitative sampling choices, and your sampling strategy for the qualitative side will use qualitative sampling choices. Then, of course, I've said to you that mixed methods isn't just twice as difficult as quantitative and qualitative research. It's more than that. And it becomes more than that because there's the additional challenge of managing how you synthesize or join up the quantitative and qualitative observations that you have made in relation to your question. Then, of course, what also happens is because it's a complicated methodology, one of the symptoms you always see is that students' work lacks integration. You see the qualitative bit, you see the quantitative bit, but you don't see an integrated way of dealing with them. And so those are some of the challenges that exist. I have already given to you some of the considerations that you have to go through when you're deciding if your study is going to be a mixed methods design study or not. So you must make sure you have a research problem that has both a quantitative and qualitative dimension. You have to know that you as a person or the team that's going to do this data collection has the appropriate prerequisite set of skills to be able to do qualitative and quantitative research. You have to also understand they cost more money if they are mixed method studies, and you must have done some feasibility for that. And the fourth consideration particularly relates to master's students. Often people have an ambition of wanting to do mixed methods research, but sometimes the nature of the different elements of it is such that there's a lot of time that you must expend. So if you have a sequential study where you do the qualitative part first and then you follow it with the quantitative part, you will find that the length of time required to do the data collection is probably much more difficult to accommodate in the length of a master's level study. So that becomes one of the reasons that you will find that it's quite unlikely for master's students to do mixed methods research. But notwithstanding that, the nature of problems that you tend to deal with are kind of monodimensional in master's level research. There's also this idea that people will present that if you're doing PhD work, it must be mixed methods. There is no such thing. I repeat, there is no such thing. You pursue or agree on the design based on the research problem. If the research problem is complex and has both these dimensions, then it becomes mixed methods research. The decision is not made by the fact that it's a PhD or master's level study. So I will make that clear. Yeah. Then now, what we need to do, and this part that the next few slides I do, I can assure you without a question that you are not going to understand them at the first go. And the only way to get it is to come back and revisit it, revisit the slides, revisit the processes that I'm sharing with you, because no one ever gets it the first time around. You get it over many permutations of thinking through it, many more iterations, but there are basically 3 decisions that you have to make when you are talking about mixed methods research. So we said the first decision that determines whether something you're doing is mixed methods research or not is the question you are trying to answer. Does it require an objective and a subjective philosophical stance for you to understand the full range of dimensions that are involved in it? Then the second thing is, when it comes to the mixing of the methods, what is the timing that occurs? Is do the qualitative and quantitative bits happen at the same time, or does one happen after the other? If they happen at the same time, then we know that your study is a mixed method design, but a concurrent mixed method design, meaning that things are happening concurrently meaning they are happening at the same time. We also have an option of mixed methods research where the qualitative and the quantitative bits are sequential. So either the qualitative bit happens first, followed by a quantitative one, or vice versa, but they are not happening at the same time. So it's when we're talking about mixed methods design, the first thing you have to clarify is the study concurrent or is it sequential? And if so, what is the sequence? And that part to do with the sequencing, I'll explain to you later about how you explain it. The second part is we also have to determine, is it a study where the qualitative element and the qualitative element and the quantitative element are vaguely about the same? Are they of equal weight? Or do we have an unequal distribution? Does your question have many more qualitative dimensions within it than the quantitative dimensions? It matters. You need to be able, in your description of your mixed methods design, be able to tell us the weighting. And I've said you should be able to tell us the timing, you should be able to tell us the weighting. Then, of course, there are the different ways in which data is mixed. So when you mix data in mixed methods research, we talk of 3 mixing opportunities. 3 mixing opportunities that when you mix the data, you can either merge it, you can embed it, or you can connect it. So merging, as the word suggests, is that actually you have people who do a qualitative element of data collection and the quantitative data element, and then when it's time to either analyze the data or to do interpretations of what they see, they merge their analysis, they merge their interpretation. That is merged data in mixed methods research. So we've spoken about timing, we've spoken about the weighting. We're also saying it's important to know how the data is mixed. The embedding type of data is when, if you think about embedding something, if I say to you, you must embed substance A onto substance B, I'm basically saying, look, you have a foundation of substance B and you take A and you kind of sprinkle it over that, and embed it, basically, for lack of a better word. And when you are embedding, you can either be embedding qualitative data into a quantitative design, or embed quantitative data into a qualitative design. And when we're embedding, the assumption is that the way data is operated is that the more heavily weighted one is the one into which you are embedding things. So if I say embed embed substance A into substance B, the assumption is that substance B is bigger than A, because that's why you are embedding it into the other. So when we go back to that issue of weighting, in an unequal weighting study, if the study has got much more quantitative elements than qualitative elements, then you are likely to be embedding the qualitative elements into the quantitative data. These ways of mixing are important because later on they help you to decide how you write about your study, how you analyze your study, how you draw inferences from it, the methods of analysis that are available. So if you are embedding qualitative data into a quantitative design, then in essence, the majority of analysis approaches will be quantitative with some sprinkling of qualitative analysis approaches. The opposite is true when you are embedding quantitative data into a qualitative design. I know you're listening to me and thinking, I'm lost. What you need to do is to go back, just rewind this at the end of this, just a minute or two, so you can understand the fact that when you mix, there are three mixing opportunities in mixed methods research: merging, embedding, and connecting. Connecting is to do with taking embedded qualitative data into a quantitative design, or taking embedded quantitative data in qualitative design. Look, here's the easy way to explain it. With connecting data, you would, if you were carrying out a study, say the first part, it was not a sequence, it is a sequential study. So you are connecting, if you have qualitative data that you study and you have results from it, and the results are qualitative, you can find ways of then expressing those qualitative outcomes in a quantitative way and using those quantitative outputs as a means of connecting the qualitative data into the real of connecting your originally qualitative data into the more substantive quantitative data. So, and you will get studies like that. Someone will start off with a qualitative piece of work, complete it and get very qualitative answers, and then think, I want these themes and I want to count them. And maybe they count them and then they say, okay, these qualitative themes are now quantitatively expressed. I want to use them as my entry point to the quantitative aspect of the study. And that is the type of connection. So that slide that we've just gone through is the thing that you need to be able to do everything else about how data is mixed in quantitative mixed methods designs. In mixed methods designs. So mixed methods designs, firstly, there are different types of them. So the very first type of mixed method design is this design where they call it the triangulation design. And that triangulation design has to do with someone who's studying qualitative things at the same time as quantitative stuff, and they make the two coincide and they are both equal. So we call that a simple, straightforward concurrent design. Of course, I've listed some of the strengths of this approach is that it's very commonly used, it's very easy to comprehend. It's efficient for data collection because you're collecting the quantitative and the qualitative design at the same time, no protracted length of time. But where the challenge is that, of course, it means you have to be doubly present because you are now doing two things at the same time. And you need to have very high expertise to be able to do this. Then, of course, there are variants in this. There's one where two people, where two different dimensions are put together just to allow them to converge at the point of data, at the point of the results. So the qualitative part and the quantitative part are equal weight, and they come together and you triangulate and deal with them simultaneously in relation to your analysis and so forth. But of course, sometimes they use it, so they use it in a convergence format, or sometimes they use it in a more data transformatory way. So, and when I say data transformatory way, is that if you join these two things, you realize that maybe you are able to represent the final analysis more in a qualitative way. So you've almost used the qualitative element to help you transform your quantitative observations. But in terms of what you need to remember, just remember that there's something called a triangulation design. And a triangulation design involves all the range of ways of mixing data when you are doing it concurrently. So you are saying, I am mixing data at the same time. I have collected quali and I've collected quanti, and I'm mixing the two and collecting them at the same time, and I bring what I find into one set of results that I analyze. That is essentially what the concurrent design looks like. There are babies to this. So if you're much more expert in your understanding of mixed methods research, there are different types of concurrent designs. There's a convergence concurrent design, the data transforming concurrent design, and so forth. And what I've done here is I've exposed one of the examples. And I try, normally at a session like this, I avoid getting too much into this because people get confused. But what I will do is just show you that we know things are triangulating. You are triangulating your designs. You are doing them at the same time. You're bringing them together. You bring them together to help you substantiate your conclusions, so that what you saw in relation to the qualitative and what you saw in relation to the quantitative might be used to validate what you think you're seeing. It can help you to confirm or corroborate each of the designs with each other. So sometimes the qualitative bit helps you to confirm what you saw quantitatively, or vice versa. It can also help you to compare. So if you do study something qualitatively and quantitatively, you are in a position to compare and contrast what's going on. Now, the convergence model basically is a model in which you are triangulating, but you are allowing data collection to happen separately in its quantitative or qualitative format. You are allowing analysis to happen individually. You are allowing the results to happen individually, but you converge those outputs when it comes to how you interpret and the two things. So the convergence occurs at interpretation, but different forms of triangulation, the convergence could happen at data collection. So you collect quali, collect quanti, bring them together, analyze them together, express the results together, and so forth. That's a different type of triangulation design from the convergence model. So if you're clear that you're actually going to literally do all of the data collection, analysis, presentation of results separately, and you're only going to compare and contrast at the point of interpreting the results, then you know you've got a convergence model, which is it's a variant of the triangulation design. At the level that you're at, for the most part, people will just say they have a triangulation design. They will not talk about it being the convergence model, because that's a little bit too specific. But I'm sharing this with you because when you read mixed methods research, you need to be prepared to understand and be able to decipher some of the languages that are used. The other variant of triangulation design, once again, it's still triangulation because you're doing things concurrently, so the data collection is happening at the same time. The quali and the quanti are happening at the same time, but it's clear that somewhere the analysis of the quantitative data is a much more substantive process, because maybe the quantitative data is more substantive, and that the qualitative data is analyzed more minimally, and you actually transform that qualitative data into quantitative data. So you've started off with the separate qual and quanti data collection approaches, but your analysis frameworks transforms one of the two approaches so that it is much more similar to the other. And that happens when you have differently weighted mixed methods research. So if your quantitative data aspect is much bigger than your qualitative one, and the qualitative one is just there, but really the concept is much more quantitative, then you can actually use your qualitative analysis, or the data that's qualitative, you transform it in a way that allows it to be expressed quantitatively, so that it's easier for you to compare and interrelate these two sources of data that you have. So, but that transformation is always difficult, eh? The transformation of data from one type of approach to another is always difficult. So sometimes when you have qualitative data and you want to transform it into quantitative data, people will have particular methods of analysis. They will have, for example, there's something called content analysis. And content analysis is a form of qualitative data analysis, but it is interested in counting the number of times certain themes or certain words appear in a qualitative narrative, so that you can say, look, that qualitative concept appeared 60 times, this other one appeared 40 times. And then when it comes to the data, you're presenting the number of times certain qualitative phenomena or themes appeared versus others. So you are expressing that qualitative data quantitatively. And so you end up having two sets of quantitative data to analyze, because you allowed yourself to transform one into the other. And that is a variant of triangulation design. It's quite a complicated one, but people often use that, the transforming variant, if they are working in fields where maybe there's respect for one type of approach over another. So say, for example, you are working in mathematics and you are studying a concept that had quanti and qualitative dimensions to it, but you understood that the world you are operating in respects numbers more than it does narratives. So you would take the narratives and present them in a more number sensitive way, so that you can have the a qualitative concept analyzed and dealt with quantitatively. So, and then another variant of triangulation design is this validating quantitative data model. So basically it's the same. Remember, the big part that matters is that it's a triangulation design. So the quantitative and qualitative data collection all happen at the same time. Then, of course, because there is convergent, but the convergence is there to help you validate quantitative data using qualitative data. So sometimes if you were, say for example, you were studying something that's quite quantitative and people gave you quantitative results, but maybe you offered them an opportunity to explain. So you might say, please tell me which of these choices you prefer and give the reasons why. When they choose the option that they want, that option can be chosen quantitatively in a survey. They'd say, yes, I've chosen option B, but their answer that tells you why will involve qualitative data, and that qualitative data that you've used, you can use it along with your quantitative results to help you validate it, to explain it better. So that process of taking those qualitative elements and throwing them essentially into a quantitative study allows you to validate the quantitative data. But it is a variant of triangulation design. This has particular strength. You know, when you do quantitative research, you ask people to make a choice. You never understand why they made the choice. But if you are interested in why people choose certain things and why a yes or a one selected by one person may differ from a one selected by another, you create elements to your questioning format that allow for some qualitative responses. And then you use those qualitative responses to validate what they've said quantitatively, to qualify it, as it were. And that is what this methodology or variant of triangulation design is. Remember, in this design, we're still dealing with what we call concurrent mixed methods research. The data collection is happening at the very, very same time. Then another variant of triangulation design is that here we have what we call a multi-level model, where in actual fact, all the data analysis and data collection is happening at the same time, but it's happening at different levels. So if, say, for example, you wanted to understand a particular phenomena, but at one level of the phenomena, you could understand it quantitatively. At another level of the phenomena, you could understand it qualitatively, and maybe at a smaller level, you could understand it quantitatively. So you have qualitative and quantitative dimensions, but maybe the overriding one is quanti, then level 2 of that is quali, and level 3 is quanti. As long as there's a mixture of quali and quanti in the same place, then it allows you to claim that it is a mixed method study. But all this analysis or data collection is happening at the same time. It's just happening at multi levels, and that, of course, gives rise to multi-level model of mixed methods research. This is typically what people do. Like if you were studying an organization, for example, if say you had to do research about how and why a certain hospital operates or a certain business operates, and maybe the first thing you looked at was you were going to collect data on people's pay, salaries, and how they do well, and that data was quantitative. But then maybe you wanted to also look at the happiness of the individuals, their satisfaction, which they express to you as qualitative data. That interest in two levels of the phenomena, the quantitative level and the qualitative level at the same time, allows you to do a multi-level triangulation design. And so that is what this type of design. So far I've spoken about triangulation, where same things are happening together, they just happen in different ways, but the data collection of quali and quanti is happening at the same time. In some ways, it happens in a way that validates, uses qualitative data to validate quantitative data, and so forth. But the other way that we do mixed methods is what they call type 2, where now instead of doing concurrent things, you do things that are concurrent, but they are concurrent and embedded. So what you are saying is that one type of data analysis or data collection is embedded in another, and it is embedded because it is, you embedded the smaller one into the bigger one. So if, say, for example, you were studying a phenomena that was largely qualitative, but in it there are some minor qualitative things that will show up so that you better understand the research question. You can make a decision that, no, I won't do this as a multi-level study, I will do it as embedded study. So predominantly you do a quantitative study in which you embed the minor qualitative data that you collect, and you present this as results. And of course, in the embedded design, some people will say quanti embedded with quali, or quali embedded with quanti, but it is essentially a qualitative or quantitative study. People will find this a very difficult design to pursue, because the whole process of embedding can look like a concurrent study, just done differently. The integration is normally sometimes difficult, so many people don't utilize this. But sometimes, if you are, say, doing a study for an organization that you know like quantitative studies, but you know there's a qualitative element that deserves your interest, but you don't want to give it a distinct presence because it waters down your study, then you can have a quantitative study with embedded qualitative designs. So that's a different type of mixed methods. There are other embedded methodologies that exist, which I won't get into, but this is one of them. And I will just share with you, so you understand the naming. When people say it's an embedded experimental model, they are saying, look, it's embedded, but in it, there's an experiment that occurs. And if you look at that diagrammatic representation, there's an experiment that happens. So something was measured quantitatively, and some intervention happened, and we measured it post the intervention. And so we have a qualitative, we have a largely qualitative study, but in it they've embedded a small quantitative experiment. So that's what this is. It's a very, very rare occurrence. I probably, in the time I've supervised many students, I've probably seen this twice, but it's important to show you so that you understand that such a format exists. Then correlational model is also another variant of the embedded design. Once again, the key element is that you have a bigger approach, either qualitative or quantitative, and in it other things have been embedded. The other one, we embedded an experiment, and this one we are embedding a correlation of how two things are related to each other, or three things are related to each other. So that's essentially the difference, but I want to skim over this because we don't really look at it. So far I've mentioned two types of mixed methods design. I spoke to you about type 1, which was the concurrent design. Then I spoke to you about type 2, which is the embedded design. Now I speak to you about the more popularly used, which is the explanatory design. Explanatory design involves two phases in a study, and it's called an explanatory design because you have an initial quantitative design that's followed by a qualitative design. So you collect data and do your things quantitatively. Then to explain what you saw, you explain it by asking your participants to comment on your quantitative outcomes, so they can offer an explanation, and that is what an explanatory design is. And there's the opposite of this, which is the exploratory design, where actually you begin with the qualitative data collection process followed by a quantitative one. So this is this very, very popularly used form of mixed methods research, where things are not done concurrently, they are done sequentially. So in explanatory design and of course the exploratory design are both examples of sequenced mixed method studies. There's a sequence, things are not happening together, but in one sequence the focus is on using qualitative results, qualitative methodologies to explain the quantitative discoveries. So we call it an explanatory design. And the next one does the opposite, where we have qualitative findings that we are exploring further by testing them out and seeing what their causal associations are, so we add the quantitative bit. So there's that explanatory and exploratory designs, and those are part of the sequential world when it comes to mixed methods research. Now, each of them have got little variants, and I will jump these variants because you don't ever really get into them. But I've included them here. If there's any of you who have a particular interest and you want to you are doing explanatory design and you're thinking, my explanatory design starts with quantitative data collection. I analyze the quantitative data, get quantitative results. I then applied qualitative stuff, and after I've applied that, I go back again and I follow it up with more quantitative interpretation. That thing where you are following up the explanations of the different approach by using a different approach to follow it. So if you have an explanation that's quantitative, you follow it up with qualitative approaches to explain what's going on. Then you take those things that you have, explain them further with a different type of approach. Those are follow-up explanatory designs. But really, we don't, no one ever gets into that. But it's important that you just have it and understand that this variant exists. There's another called the participant selection model, which is also a part of a variant explanatory design. This, remember, we talked about how explanatory design is initially starting with quantitative data and using qualitative data to explain what you're seeing. But usually in participant selection model, people will use the quantitative results that they've got, and from that find very specified participants that they will subject to qualitative processes. So they don't look at all the quantitative results, they pick certain elements of that and subject that to the qualitative process. So essentially they transform their way of working with data from being a very quantitative one where you are taking indiscriminate samples to then going, no, let me qualitatively identify purposive selection of certain participants to meet my requirements. But these are very, very educated and very thorough types of mixed methods designs. The examples that I'm showing you, I told you that in the sequential methodologies, there's explanatory and exploratory designs. So exploratory designs is where you start off with qualitative phase followed by a quantitative phase. So, and we call this the exploratory sequential design. Remember, I said to you, explanatory and exploratory are both sequential designs. One just helps to, the first explanatory one, you collect quantitative data and you use your qualitative data to explain it. Then in exploratory design, you collect qualitative data, but you want to explore the mechanisms of the relationships by applying quantitative terminal actions. And so you start qualitative, and then you start qualitative and you subject that qualitative to quantitative testing. So then you're able to explore much more what's going on within the qualitative data. And once again, there are different types, and I won't get into these, but they are very rarely used. If you've figured out, you will realize that some particular designs have very particular characteristics, and for that reason they are called they are named in a way that tells you the characteristic. So the instrument development model, for example, is where someone will do a qualitative study, then they take the qualitative outcomes and they say, okay, these qualitative outcomes tell me that these factors matter. Let me use my qualitative outcomes to help me to develop the instrument that I will use for quantitative data collection. So this is a variant of exploratory design. It's very common, and many students actually describe it in their research. They'll say, oh, I'm expecting to do a qualitative followed by quantitative study, but I can't tell you what my quantitative survey will look like until I've done the qualitative study. So that is the instrument development variant of an exploratory design. Remember, I told you many times that you cannot figure all this out in one go. Hey, you will figure it out as you read and play with this over and over again. Right, so this is another type of variant of exploratory design. Remember, it's sequential, but what happens was, remember, the other variant allowed you to develop an instrument. This one allows you to develop a classification system. So you collect quantitative data, you analyze it, you have results, then you say, okay, let me develop a theory around these results. Then once you've got that theory, you subject the theory and its concepts and components of it to quantitative data collection and so forth. And then from that, you're saying, look, I used my qualitative data to help me to develop a theory or a taxonomy. And then I took the components of the taxonomy and I collected data under those components, in data that was related to those categories, and I've analyzed it. So you used your qualitative data to develop a taxonomy. You took the components of the taxonomy and you collected data that's related to each of the categories and components. You analyzed it, you interpreted it, and that is the taxonomy development model of this variant. Now, mixed methods research, of course, is very difficult for a number of reasons. Generally, qualitative research has very specific rules. Quantitative research has very specific rules. When you put them together, they don't always make sense in one space. So there's a whole range of complexities that come, the different types of information that have to be handled. It's difficult to explain the studies because the things are different. It's also much more difficult to explain to your participants by virtue of the fact that you are really doing things that are mixed up and very different. The consent forms that people write up in mixed method studies can be difficult. Take, for example, if you're doing a mixed method study and you are subjecting the same group of people to questions and you are doing, say, an explanatory or an exploratory methodology, where you would start off with, as I've said, with the exploratory methodologies, where you would start off with one methodology, found an outcome, then use those outcomes to develop the data collection of the next one. So when you're asking someone to consent, you can't even tell them what will be in their data collection tool, because you'll only discover the components of the second data collection tool after you've subjected them to phase one. So it's all difficult. There's a lot of things. What I can say, put up is some of the commonly encountered ethical issues for your consumption. Then, of course, when it comes to the development of proposals, there are just some basic things that I need to give you as hints. Look, a mixed method study is research nonetheless. So the rules are exactly the same in many ways, but where they differ is that when it comes to you describing the methodology, you must describe both the quantity and the qualitative methods. When it comes to telling us what the objectives of the study is or are, one should be able to look at your 6 or 5 objectives or 3 objectives or whatever and see that objective 1 looks qualitative, objective 2 looks quantity, objective 3 looks quality, and the order in which those objectives sit and the order of the design will tell you whether it's an explanatory, sequential study, exploratory sequential, or a format of a concurrent study. But you only know that once you know the objectives, because then it tells you what you're going to find out in the order in which you're finding it out. If you're finding it out where you're finding out both things at the same time, then it's a concurrent design. If you're finding out qualitative things and you're using them to inform your quantitative things, then it's an exploratory study and so forth. But as I've said, and I say it broadly, but I'll restate, is that you are literally going to have the both worlds appear all throughout your proposal, that the qualitative dimensions, the quantitative dimensions will exist. And what I've done here is I've just listed the research process in terms of your proposal and how mixed methods research expresses itself in different places, in your literature review, in your methods, in your ethical issues, in the timelines for your study, and so forth. And all these are just hints, nothing more. So, and to now bring the session to a nice, neat end, and it's exactly just a little over 1 hour, 10 minutes that I've taken. This is the exact time that one had hoped that this would take. I've attached some important thinkers and readers and contributors to this field, and one of the contributors that is critical in this world of mixed methods research is Creswell. So any of you who read any work on mixed methods research, Creswell is the name that you want, and you need to focus on that. With that said, I'm going to now take us back to the question and answer setting and just look at some of the questions that are published in front of me. Before I will turn on my camera, I just need to state some very basic observations and points that we should remember about mixed methods research. You cannot learn about it without being exceptionally good at qualitative research, exceptionally good at quantitative research. because those two make the components of this. So unless you are strong at those two, you cannot begin to even embark on mixed methods research. You need to develop the two. So when the sessions that you get on mixed methods research tell you how those two approaches mix, but it doesn't teach you about the two approaches. You have to go and learn about them. Then the mixing of them becomes what mixed methods research is. It does not all happen at the same time. As I was saying, sorry, excuse me, I was just trying to click on to the questions that we have, and now I will turn on my camera, and hopefully you should be able to see me. Okay, there we go. Now let's look at these questions. Let's see. So remember, folks, you cannot study mixed methods research on its own without actually understanding qualitative research and quantitative research and understanding them exceptionally, because the mixing takes a lot more expertise than dealing with either one at any one given time. So in mixed methods research, someone asked me which design comes first, quantitative or qualitative. I think I've answered that question. So there are different types of mixed methods research. There's mixed methods research where both come together, and we call that concurrent research. Then there's one called sequential mixed methods research where one comes after the other. And what really defines it for you is that you must develop the question that you're interested in asking or the problem you need to understand. Write down the objectives that you need to work on. Then ask yourself, is objective one a qualitative one? Is objective two quantitative? Will they both be achieved at the same time, or will I achieve one before the other? The answer that you get in that analysis tells you which one comes first, which one comes first, second. We have also shared with you the link for you to access the recordings if you need to, and you'll find that on the Q&A string that we have, the chat that we have. Ruth is asking, when using quantitative or qualitative methods, does a researcher have to collect primary data or can existing data be used? If so, what are the implications for the research procedures? So remember, qualitative mixed methods research is like all research. It's just that you've mixed methods. You've mixed qualitative and quantitative data. So the answer is yes, you can have secondary data. You can use existing data, but that existing data has to be clear-cut qualitative data, clear-cut quantitative data. If you have existing data that has numbers and other things, but you don't subject it to critical mixed methods research, you need to just be careful that you don't call it mixed methods research because the data had numbers and it had narratives. That is not. The mixed method research means that you've subjected every element of whatever data it is to the entire research process, to collection, analysis, this and that and that and that. And the implications for the research procedures are many, varied, but remember, using existing data comes with weaknesses, it comes with strengths, it comes with limitations, it comes with inflexibilities. So those inflexibilities become inherent in the new mixed method research that you have. So whatever micro approach you use, the weaknesses and strengths of that micro approach come with you when you do mixed methods research. In fact, they become compounded because they are now lost in another approach altogether. So it is complicated. It just gets more and more complicated. But the principle to remember is that anything you import into a mixed method process, it carries with it all its features, all its errors, all its problems, all its enhancements. You are just now dealing with twice as many because you've got qualitative dimensions and quantitative dimensions. Is it possible to use both deductive and inductive research approaches in a mixed method research? The answer is yes, 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 yes. Of course it is. And the reason it is that qualitative research and quantitative research are either tend to be, one is more deductive, the other is more inductive. So the very fact that you are joining the two means you are carrying all the baggage that comes with them. And that is what I keep stating over and over, that all the rules that apply to qualitative research, all the rules that apply to quantitative research still exist in a mixed method study. They just exist for the different elements of the study. And of course, in the part of the study where you join the two, then you now have the interplay of both quali and quantitative rules, expectations, all in one. And that's where that integration challenge comes, where we are saying people struggle with integration because we're asking them to now deal with this new form of data that has all the characteristics of all the other different types and is problematic in the same way. Which one comes first? I think I've answered that question. Yeah, depends on your question. I can't predict to you. I've given you different types of formats that exist. You have to figure out whether your particular question lends itself to qualitative first, followed by quantitative first, or vice versa, or both occurring at the same time. Folks, these sessions we do, I teach you theory. If you have other things that you are working on, you have the option then of submitting them, and one of our very competent reviewers will review your work and guide you more personally. Are we allowed to use online methods to collect data? The answer is yes, but you have to then go and look at online data collection methods. But that online method of collecting data is not an exclusive issue in mixed methods research. That to me is a generic question about any type of research. And the answer is yes, but you have to follow the rules and all the provisions and adopt all the weaknesses that come with online methodologies versus face-to-face ones. Is it possible to use document review in quantitative part of an explanatory study? Well, folks, we know, and in COSA, we know that documents, the way that we are thinking about them, are not qualitative, nor are they quantitative. They tend to be have some numbers, have some narratives, so you can't exactly use it in a quantitative part of an exploratory study unless the document is in itself a quantitative report. Then maybe you can. So I think what you really have to do is just to apply the same rules of discretion, the same questioning rules to make these decisions. The truth is, mixed method research does not have any other rules except how to do with the mixing, the embedment process, and the weighting. Everything else that exists in mixed methods rule is either inherited from qualitative research or quantitative research, depending on what element you are looking at. There's a question that's asking about submission of chapter and so forth, and I will ask that my able colleagues just type out a response. They've also sent you some information about where to get slides and where the recording will be available. So yes, as I look at this, it's 7:20. Noticing that one of my able team are just looking at answering the question about submission of chapters and so forth, but I think we are good with the questions. After our response is posted by my colleague, I think we will be, there we go. it says, please send these things to pgsp@unisa.ac.za, P post, G graduate, S support, P program, postgraduate support program. So pgsp@unisa.ac.za. That is where you take these things. On that note, I want to also maybe ask the same colleague who typed out that email to just maybe indicate the date of our next session, which will of course be next week. Yeah, we invite you to join us to continue those things. But remember, you've also received the link about where you get the PowerPoint slides and everything else. So I want to thank you for your attendance this evening. As I say, this presentation is one that you have to go back to over and over and over just to get it right, because it's not simple. It is possibly the most difficult of any of the sessions that you do because of the different variants involved, and because we assume you enter it with very substantial knowledge of quantitative and qualitative research, which is of course not always the case. Yeah, that's where we go. So I am looking at this. Yeah, right. With that said, I want thank you very much to our moderator. It says on the 1st of August, we're looking at the role of theoretical and conceptual frameworks in scholarly research. This seems like a topic I teach. I don't know if it's me or not, but if it is, we'll see you then. On that note, I want to thank you all for using up your Friday in this way, and I hope that this session will be meaningful to you for many, many months to come. Thank you. Have a good night.